So in this video, I'm gonna show you how you can recreate this 3D model in Blender, and I'm also going to explain you how I created the procedural materials. If you're interested in a 3D file, you can find it on xrpage.com. I've started by creating the stock of the weapon, and I did it with a normal cube. After, select one edge and press G and move it on the x-axis. After, select all these edges and press Ctrl B. Press I and E on the keyboard in order to inset a face and after to extrude it. Now you can duplicate what you've created, and by moving it you can after use a boolean. I used a cube with a boolean also for creating the space for the recharge of the weapon, and other booleans for some minor details. Press Shift R for repeating the same operation more times. Now for creating the recharge, I've added a cylinder with 6 vertices, and after press Ctrl R, S and X. Select the loop faces that you've created and press E, S, Shift X or Shift Y, depending on the axis that you're working on. Convert to mesh. Now select these 2 edges and press F and also Ctrl R. Select the faces and press Separate and Selection. Go to Object, Set Origin and Origin to Geometry. Now by pressing Ctrl C and Ctrl V, copy and paste the actual dimensions. In this way you are sure that the recharge fits really well in the spot. And after, repeat the same thing, so pressing Ctrl C and Ctrl V also for the location. Make sure that it's to global and copy the z-axis value and paste it on the cube face. Do the same thing as before also for the location. Use 2 booleans, one for creating the 2 pieces, and use another boolean for the space of the recharge. Add another time cylinder of 6 vertices, and this will be the main part of the weapon. After, use a boolean on the stock. In this way we can create an extrusion for these 6 edges here, and actually remember to select also the 2 minor pieces. Press E and X on the keyboard. After, switch to face select, Alt left click, ES Shift X. Now add a loop cut by pressing Ctrl R on the keyboard and select this loop in the same way as before and As before, press ES and Shift X. Press I on the keyboard to insert a face and E for extrude it. Now press Ctrl R and select a factor. This factor will be used on both sides. And press E for extrude and select also here a value. Press Ctrl 2 times and start to repeat the same process that you've just done. Select the weapon and as before make sure that it is set on global and copy the value on the Z axis. After select other mesh and paste the value. After use an array modifier in order to create a sequence. For the scope you can also use here another hexagon. So select it as the two faces and press I for inset. After, by pressing E, extrude this one and start to select the edges and press F on the keyboard in order to create these kind of side faces here. I've added another cylinder of 6 vertices and scale it down in a way that fits in the two pieces. Use a boolean in order to cut a hole. And after just move it below the scope. After select with hold and left click the loop of faces and press S Shift X. After select the face on the top and press E and Z. Now by pressing Ctrl R you can add some loops and in this way you can start to add some little detail. By pressing E Shift X you can start to extrude some faces. Delete these faces and after that select 2 edges at a time and press F in order to create a face. After that press Ctrl R and F. In this case, I'm going to use another cylinder and a boolean, because if I do this in the traditional way, so by selecting the face and pressing I on the keyboard, I'll have some problem. And so in order to have a clean 6 edges hexagon, I'm going to use a boolean. And as you can see, I can insert faces without limits in this way. Otherwise, I would have more edges and I would have encountered problems. I've used a cylinder of like 30 vertices in order to cut a hole, and after remember to change the shadow to smooth value. After I continued because I wanted to add some like minor details to the front part of the weapon. For creating the suppressor, I've used a cylinder of 30 vertices. After, I've pressed the Ctrl R to add some loop cuts. You can select one by pressing Alt and left click, and if you press also S, you can scale it. For the last thing, I've used a bevel by pressing Ctrl B. After that, you press Ctrl B and you set the dimension of the bevel. In the bottom right part of the screen, you can adjust the number of segments. From now, actually, I'm going to show you a time-lapse that will cover the rest of the modeling part, because I didn't use some new commands. In every single step I've used E for extrude, I for inset a face, and the boolean modifier. So by giving you the time-lapse to watch, you can see how I created the rest of the weapon. At the end of the time-lapse, I'm going to show you how you can create the skin of the weapon and also the other materials. Once you're done with the modeling part, in order to create a skin, or if you want to import this 3D model in other programs like Unreal Engine or Twinmotion, you should change the UV mapping of the weapon. I'm going to show you how you can do that. So this is the final result that you see here. This is how your 3D model should look like, or something similar, and in order to fix this, you need to go on Object, select Apply, and press Scale. Now, by pressing Tab, you enter Edit mode. You select Edge Select here, press Select and select Sharp Edges. In the case that you have some loops, like these ones here, leave only one edge for loop. Now press right click, mark seam, switch to face select, select all the faces, unwrap, unwrap. If you don't know how you can create this square texture here, just go to UV editing, select new. Here you can change the resolution, switch to UV grid and press OK. Now go to shading and select here the texture that you've just created. In the case that the object is a cylinder, I'll show you real quick. So add a cylinder, make sure that the scale is to 1. If it is not to 1, Object, apply scale. Now press Tab and repeat the same exact sequence, but this time select one edge. Press mark seam after unwrap. As you can see now, it's ready to go. Now I'll show you how I create the procedural materials that you can see applied on this model. So let's start with this black with these white edges here. So in order to create the selection of the white parts, you have to create this combination of nodes. So texture coordinate, bevel. Remember to connect the normal value of the texture coordinate to the normal of the bevel. In this way, when you scale the model, the bevel will have the same dimension across the model. After, there is a cross product, that is a vector matte node. Switch add to cross product. The other one is an absolute node. This is a matte node. Select add and switch to absolute. In this way, all the value will be above 0, and so it will be consistent across all the mesh. Now the color ramp actually increase or decrease the power. I've used 2 times a mix shader, and both mix shaders have in common one principal BSDF that has black as a color, low metallic and medium roughness. The first mix shader has this factor that is a noise texture with color to vector of a mask curve texture, and as you can see is this one. And the second input is another principal BSDF with a color ramp gray to white and another color ramp that is slightly darker, both connected to the same noise texture. And this is the first material. So let's move on with the skin of the weapon. This is a bit more complicated, but there is something in common. So for what regard the skin of the weapon, I've created these procedural materials here. So the basic part is just placement map. I used also invert color and this other node with 0.87, 1.5 and 0.7 for the values. In a principal BSDF that has 0 as metallic, and for the roughness just a noise texture with a color ramp with white and gray. The noise texture has 7.8 as a scale and it is to 15. There is also here a bevel that is almost the same one as before, the radius is 0.3, this is the only difference. And actually, as you can see, it's the same technique that I've used in the past material, so there are two mixed shaders here. And this time the other material is a bit more complicated, as you can see. And this material here that you can see is the one that you see on the edges, like before, this kind of reflective material here. So it's a Maskrift texture with a color ramp, with this color here, just a little bit of saturation and a gray. Really strong contrast for the metallic, and I've used it for that noise texture with a color ramp. And I've also used a bump node that is connected to the same factor of the first mix shader. So this is how the materials should look like with only these nodes. So the little details that you see here are generated with this noise texture connected to an RGB curves with this kind of shape and a color ramp here. As you can see, if I move this, the details will disappear, and if I move this in, the details will start to duplicate. So after the second mix shader, I've used a third mix shader, one that has this factor of the lit holes, and in order to add some bump, I've used this principal BSDF with bump here, obviously, that is connected to the same factor as the first mix shader. And for the color, I've just used this kind of gray to dark white color ramp with a Maskrift texture here with scale on 33 and details to 15, one at the metallic and the low roughness. This is the bevel, the effect of the bevel, and this is the factor of the first mix shader here. So the laser is actually really simple. The texture is this one, so base color green, emission strength 20, and emission obviously to green. So the crosshair of the scope is actually really simple. It's just a crosshair images with the alpha channel connected to this node in order to tweak the saturation and the value. And after that, I've used a transparent BSDF with a glossy BSDF with 0.05 as roughness. In this way we have some kind of reflection. This yellow material here is the same one that I've shown you before for the scope. The only thing that changes is the color. For the suppressor, I've used this normal material here, really simple to do. Just change the roughness. Now let's move on about the recharge of the weapon. So this is a little bit more complicated and there is some modeling involved. So as you can see, I just selected the external faces and I've inspected them in this way. Just press Alt and left click, select the loop, after press I. Now press G, X or EX. After, select this material and press Assign. For what regard the shading here, so there is an external part that is this one with normal principal BSDF with zero roughness and high transmission. And there is a second part inside that, as you can see, is a similar material but as base color red, and I've used it in order to create this kind of waves. This texture stretched on the x-axis here with the mapping node, a color ramp and a bump. The bubbles inside Ecospheres. This one with my subdivision to 1. This one with the white external glass that you see. And after that I've selected this mesh here, I've duplicated it, and I've put the scaled hexagons also here in order to add some details. These kind of black grips part are really simple. As you can see, it's just a principal BSDF with roughness to 1, exactly like the suppressor, and the only thing that changes is the color. So that's basically how I've created the weapon. I've used this model in a much bigger render of a vehicle. I've also made 2 tutorials about the creation of this vehicle that you are seeing right now on the screen. So if you're interested, check them out, and I hope that you found this video helpful. Subscribe for more, and see you all in the next one.